Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the three big ideas. You can almost think of them as giant operating systems that have been battling for control of our world for centuries. These are the ideologies that really shape everything, from the price of your coffee to the news headlines you're seeing every single day.
It all really boils down to this one single, massive question. What is the right relationship between the government, the market, and the rest of society? Should the market be the master? Should the state be in the driver's seat? Or is there some other way to look at it? How you answer this question fundamentally shapes how you see the world.
And when we use this word, ideology, we mean something pretty specific. The economist Robert Heilbroner put it perfectly. These aren't just, abstract theories. They're complete belief systems. They're frameworks that try to explain the world not just as it is, but as they believe it should be.
And that brings us to our three main contenders: liberalism, nationalism, and Marxism. Just think of them as rival answers to that big question we just asked. Liberalism says, hey, let's try to keep politics and economics in their own separate lanes. Nationalism says, no way, politics must control economics. And then you have Marxism, which argues that economics is the very foundation that determines everything else, including politics.
Okay, so let's start with what has really been the dominant champion in the modern world: liberalism. This idea was born out of the Enlightenment, pretty much as a reaction against absolute state control. And it's the foundation of what we now call orthodox economics.
The whole liberal worldview is really built on a few core beliefs. First, it sees all of us as rational individuals, making logical choices to improve our own lives. It views markets as these natural, almost spontaneous systems that just pop up to meet our needs. And the thinking goes, when we trade and exchange things freely, both of us benefit, and that leads to a sort of natural balance, an equilibrium. The end result? A harmony of interests, where the idea is that a rising tide lifts all boats.
And this leads to probably the most famous liberal mantra of all: there's no such thing as a free lunch. At its core, this is all about opportunity cost. It means that every single time you choose to do one thing, you are also choosing not to do something else. This idea of trade-offs, it's just absolutely central to the liberal economic model.
It all sounds wonderfully neat and tidy, doesn't it? A system that just corrects itself and creates wealth for everyone. But that brings up a really crucial question. What is this seemingly perfect model not seeing? What does it leave out?
Well, here are the main criticisms. Liberalism is often seen as being pretty static. It kind of just accepts the way wealth and power are already distributed as the starting point. It's much more concerned with efficiency than with fairness or justice in the final outcomes. And maybe most critically, it tends to assume that every exchange is totally free and equal, which can ignore the huge role that power and even coercion can play.
So those liberal blind spots, especially the one about power, lead us straight to our first major challenger: nationalism. The nationalist perspective looks at that whole free market idea and basically says, not so fast. For a nationalist, the state, its security, its power, that has to come first, always. For an economic nationalist, the goal is not about maximizing your individual choice or making consumers happy. The economy is a tool, and its main purpose is to build up the power, the security, and the wealth of the nation-state itself. Period.
So the nationalist playbook is pretty clear. The number one goal is industrialization, because industry is the foundation of modern military power. And this totally changes how you look at trade. It's not about creating a win-win for everyone, it's about who wins more. This idea of relative gain becomes way more important than mutual gain, which naturally leads to a focus on self-sufficiency and protecting your own industries.
Now, this is a really powerful and, frankly, very persistent way of seeing the world. But what happens when you prioritize national power above all else? What are the potential costs? Well, for one, nationalists often see economics as a zero-sum game. If I win, you have to lose. And that means they can miss out on chances for everybody to benefit. Also, the constant pursuit of military power can really drain an economy and make it less efficient. And here's a big critique. The national interest can often become a convenient excuse for powerful groups inside a country who just want protection from competition for their own selfish reasons.
And that brings us to our second big challenger: Marxism. Now, this isn't just a critique, it's a radical reimagining of the entire system. From this point of view, the economic base, the way we produce things, is destiny. It shapes all of politics, all of society, all of history.
So Marx believed that capitalism was governed by three inevitable laws that would eventually cause its own collapse. It starts with what he called disproportionality. Basically, the system makes more stuff than people can actually buy, which leads to crises. This then triggers the concentration of capital. Competition gets brutal, and wealth gets concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. And that finally leads to the falling rate of profit. As capital piles up, profits shrink, and the investment that fuels the whole system just dries up.
But of course, the big revolution that Marx predicted, it didn't really happen, right? So Vladimir Lenin came along and updated the theory. He argued that capitalism managed to survive by going global. Imperialism, he said, gave it an escape hatch. New markets to sell its extra stuff, new sources of cheap resources, and new places to invest its extra cash, which let it temporarily escape its own built-in problems.
And this led Lenin to what's basically a fourth law, the law of uneven development. The idea is that because capitalist nations grow at different speeds, the balance of power in the world is always shifting. Eventually, a rising power will challenge a declining one for control over colonies and resources, making war between them pretty much inevitable. Now, that is a powerful, dynamic theory of how international conflict works. But it leads to the same nagging question that followed Marx. If capitalism's collapse, driven by crises and war, was supposed to be inevitable, then why did it survive the 20th century? Why is it still the dominant system in the 21st? Well, the answer lies in a huge development that none of the original thinkers really saw coming: the rise of the modern welfare state. This one single innovation completely changed the game.
So how exactly did capitalism survive? This table really lays it out. The modern welfare state took on each of Marx's laws directly. To fight disproportionality, it started managing demand with government spending and interest rates. To fight the concentration of capital, it used progressive taxes to redistribute income. And to fight falling profits, governments started pouring money into research and education to spark new innovation.
So it looked like at the national level, the welfare state had kind of fixed capitalism's self-destructive tendencies. It created a stable system that Lenin and Marx thought was impossible. But in solving that problem, it accidentally created a brand new one. That fundamental tension, it didn't just disappear, it was basically exported. The conflict between the pure logic of the market and the social need for stability, it just moved from being a domestic class struggle to an international struggle between different countries.
And this leaves us with the massive contradiction of our own time. On the one hand, you've got the interventionist welfare state, which is designed to protect its citizens and manage its own domestic economy. And on the other hand, you have the open global market, which demands less intervention and the free flow of everything across borders. These two systems, these two logics, are now on a direct collision course.
And so that leaves us with the central question for our era. In this global clash between the demands of the interventionist nation-state and the demands of the open global market, which one is ultimately going to prevail? The answer to that question is going to define the world for decades to come. Thank you for watching The Explainer.